Hi, my name is Wilson Pun. I've been a real estate attorney in New York for over 10 years now, and I've helped hundreds of clients close on their real estate transactions. I guess I touched on this a little bit before, so issues and red flags that buyers should look for, especially if they've seen in the recent news any sort of large rainstorms, flooding in an area. Those are typically the most common. Any sort of recent water damage between the time of contract signing and closing, you want to make sure that it didn't affect your property in any way. And if it did affect it, that you sort of get the information to go along with it. Make sure that there's no mold. For example, if you see floorboards, portions of the bottom of the walls being cut out, that may be signs that there was mold damage there. Any issues with the walls, cracking, creasing, those are typically signs. On the closing day, as a purchaser, you're typically, if you're getting a loan, you're signing all the loan documents. So depending on your lender and then the lender's attorney, that includes at minimum, you're signing a promissory note, which is the IOU on the amount that you're borrowing from the bank. You're signing the mortgage, which is going to reflect the amount that you're borrowed, and it's going to be recorded against the block and lot of your property. So the collateral is your property, and the mortgage secures the loan amount against your property. And then there's various other loan documents that may also accompany your loan, the various other loan documents that you'll have to sign depending on what the lender attorney prepares or what the lender requires. You're also going to be signing as the purchaser transfer docs, which will be recorded along with the deed that evidences you as the new purchaser, and the seller will also be signing the transfer docs that will be recorded along with the deed that the seller signed. So the seller is the one that's signing the deed. They're deeding over the property to you as a new purchaser, along with the transfer docs. Those instruments are recorded by the title company. So closing day problems, what we typically see is, for example, let's say the sellers, there's multiple sellers and not all of them attend closing. Either they weren't properly informed or there's an emergency. That typically requires the closing to be adjourned because the deed will need to be signed by all the sellers. If, for example, the sellers didn't intend to actually be at the closing table, but worked out ahead of time with the title company that they would pre-sign all the instruments they needed to sign. That's not uncommon. It's arrangement typically is possible where you have sellers that maybe already moved out of state, they're no longer around, so they won't physically be at the closing, but they'll pre-sign all the documents necessary. They'll get it notarized and they'll usually overnight it to the title company. In rare circumstances, the overnight mail gets lost, you're going to have delays there. Or similarly, if the situations where we schedule a closing date and one of the sellers is abroad and he can't make it back in time, that's going to cause issues. Something that's common is you have that are in Asia, for example, even if they're signing documents, because there are documents that are required to be notarized. In Asia, you're going to have to go to the embassy essentially to get your documents notarized, and that usually takes days, if not weeks. You have to make an appointment to actually show up before you can actually get a notary while you're out of country. So that can add to closing time and delays. So how can buyers ensure a smooth closing experience? Well, the first thing is that just make sure that you speak with your attorney to get a proper sense of what the closing timeline is. One common pitfall I see a lot is that a lot of buyers will see an on or about date on the contract, which I mentioned in our previous video. If, for example, even if you're getting a mortgage, it's going to be on or about 60 days from the day you originally signed the contract. So your potential buyer is going to say, okay, I signed the contract on January 1st. Then that means I should be able to close by the end of February, right? Because it's on or about 60 days. But the way the contract works is that even if it's on or about, it doesn't necessarily mean that the sellers are obligated to close on that date, because they have a 30-day flexibility window on or about from that date. So it may close, even 30 days or later after that. So, one mistake would be to lock your interest rate early, anticipating that the sellers will definitely be able to close on the 60th day. So definitely that's something you don't want to do. In addition to that, you don't want to rely on a specific closing date, but you also want, you also want to make sure you have your funds ready, your closing funds. So in addition to the amount of funds you're getting from a potential mortgage, if you're looking to finance the purchase, you also want to make sure whatever cash to close that you need to bring to the closing table is readily available as well. You want to make sure your closing costs don't come as a surprise to you. So that's something to definitely speak with your attorney about, with an estimated closing cost along with an estimated title bill from the title company. Those things, they come in ranges once again based on where your property is located, the property sale price. So it's hard to really get a blanket amount there. So get that amount ahead of time, as close as possible, so that you have those funds set aside, so that 2-3 days before closing, when you get the closing costs, when you get the checks or the wires that you need to have ready and paid at closing, you aren't surprised to find out that you're short $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, that all your funds are ready to go, that you give yourself sufficient cushion, that you understand what all those closing costs are. Especially sometimes people get caught off guard, for example, when a lender requires escrow for real estate tax or insurance. So your real estate taxes and insurance costs, insurance is typically paid on an annual basis, and real estate taxes are typically paid on a quarterly basis. But what sometimes people may not know is that as a lender, you're paying those quarterly out of an escrow account, but that escrow account is funded by the purchaser on a prorated monthly basis. So every month, in addition to your principal and interest payment on the loan itself, you're paying that prorated monthly rate for real estate taxes and insurance, so that your lender can pay it for you when they become due. Not only that, with your escrow account, most of the time actually, your lender will require there be a certain cushion in there as well. Should a potential borrower default on their loan, the lender wants to make sure that they're not underwater right away on carrying costs. So they may have a cushion, 3-4 months worth of real estate taxes in there, that they will require the borrower fund upfront at closing. So depending on how much real estate tax on your property is, and depending on your county, those costs can definitely add up and may come as a surprise to your monthly payment amount if you don't prepare yourself ahead of time. So definitely get an understanding of what your monthly costs are and how much money you need to bring to the closing table. And another thing that I find pretty common is understand that these closings typically take on average about 2 hours. Sometimes I have clients, they maybe allocate half an hour. They think this is a quick process. They come in, sign some documents and leave. Usually, especially if it's a sit-down closing with multiple parties, if it's a complicated transaction, I've seen these closings take over a day sometimes. Definitely make sure you allocate a sufficient amount of time for that closing. That, for example, if you're the purchaser, you may need to get bank checks in the morning, and going to the bank, waiting online to get the bank checks, then going to the closing location with those bank checks may take a bit more of time. So make sure you plan out your day accordingly so that the closing experience is smooth for everyone.